A man without money can be ignored, but a man with dignity can never truly be defeated. The laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Foundation Grand Gala as if the room itself had learned to applaud cruelty dressed as sophistication. Waiters glided across polished marble floors carrying silver trays of sparkling cider and delicate hors d'oeuvres while the city's wealthiest executives exchanged confident smiles beneath golden lights that shimmered like tiny stars. At the far end of the ballroom, Ethan Miller adjusted the collar of his only navy blazer, one he had bought nearly 7 years earlier for his late wife's memorial service. It fit a little tighter now across his shoulders from years of lifting electrical panels and climbing maintenance ladders, but Lily insisted he looked handsome. 8-year-old Lily Miller stood proudly beside him wearing a pale blue dress bought from a neighborhood thrift store, carefully pressed the night before until every wrinkle disappeared. She held a small envelope against her chest as though it contained the most valuable treasure in the world. Inside rested a watercolor painting she had spent weeks creating for the Foundation's Children's Scholarship exhibition, a picture of her father holding her hand beneath a sunrise painted with soft orange and gold. Across the bottom she had written in careful block letters, "My dad always comes home." Ethan squeezed her shoulder gently. "No matter what happens in there, I'm already proud of you." Lily smiled with the quiet confidence only children still believe is enough to change the world. They stepped toward the registration table where elegant guests checked in beneath enormous white flower arrangements nearly as tall as Ethan himself. The woman behind the desk glanced at their invitation, then slowly lifted her eyes toward Ethan's worn shoes before forcing a polite smile that never reached her face. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound courteous while ensuring everyone nearby could still hear. "This scholarship reception is intended for participating families and sponsors." Ethan nodded calmly. "My daughter is one of the student finalists." The woman examined the list again before tilting her head. "It appears every finalist was asked to attend with both parents or an official sponsor. I don't see either listed here." Lily's fingers tightened around the envelope. Ethan answered softly. "It's just the two of us." A businessman waiting behind them chuckled under his breath before whispering to his companion, "Guess some people never read the fine print." Another woman offered a sympathetic smile that somehow felt even colder than the laughter. Ethan simply reached for Lily's hand. "It's okay," he whispered. "We came because your painting deserved to be here. Whether anyone hangs it or not doesn't change what it means." Lily looked down, fighting the sting gathering behind her eyes. Before Ethan could turn away, another voice sliced gently through the uncomfortable silence. "Excuse me," it said, calm, graceful, unmistakably confident. Conversations nearby faded almost instantly as Claire Whitmore stepped away from a group of board members. The 34-year-old CEO carried herself with effortless composure, dressed in an elegant ivory evening gown beneath a tailored white coat that softened the authority everyone associated with her name. She had been crossing the ballroom toward the stage when she noticed the little girl hugging a painting instead of celebrating it. Claire's eyes lingered for only a moment on Ethan's weathered hands, the faded cuff of his jacket, and the quiet way he shielded his daughter from embarrassment without raising his voice. Something about that silence reached her more deeply than any speech she would deliver that evening. Neither Ethan nor Lily recognized the woman approaching them. To them she was simply another elegantly dressed stranger walking through a room where they clearly did not belong. But before another word could be spoken, Claire stopped directly in front of them, looked at the watercolor still clutched against Lily's heart, and for the very first time in years, the most powerful woman in the room forgot entirely about the billion-dollar decision waiting for her just beyond the ballroom doors. Claire Whitmore lowered herself until she was at eye level with Lily, completely ignoring the restless murmurs beginning to ripple through the ballroom behind her. Her attention rested only on the little girl clutching the watercolor with both hands as though letting go might allow someone else to decide whether her dream mattered. "May I see your painting?" Claire asked gently. Lily looked toward her father first. Ethan gave a small nod filled with quiet reassurance. Lily carefully handed the envelope to the elegant stranger. Claire slid the painting free and stared at it longer than anyone expected. The colors were simple, the brushstrokes imperfect, but the feeling was unmistakable. A father walking beside his daughter beneath a rising sun. No mansion. No expensive car. No glamorous vacation. Just two people refusing to let go of each other. At the bottom, the words made something tighten deep inside Claire's heart. My dad always comes home. She read them twice before looking at Ethan. Did she really paint this herself? Ethan smiled with the humble pride that only a parent could understand. Every bit of it. She even stayed up early on Saturdays because the morning light made the colors look warmer. Lily quickly added, Daddy made pancakes while I painted. Claire almost smiled. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her without trying to impress her, flatter her, or gain something in return. Around them, several board members exchanged puzzled looks. One of the event organizers hurried toward Claire with nervous urgency. Miss Whitmore, the press conference begins in 8 minutes. Everyone is waiting. Claire did not even glance in his direction. Instead, she asked Lily another question. Why did you paint a sunrise? Lily answered without hesitation. Because mornings mean Daddy always gets another chance. The ballroom grew unexpectedly quiet. Even the conversations nearest the registration table softened as if people sensed something changing. Ethan shifted slightly, uncomfortable with becoming the center of attention. Miss, thank you for being kind, he said. But we should probably get out of everyone's way. Claire slowly rolled the painting back into the envelope before handing it back with unusual care. You are not in anyone's way. Ethan hesitated. I appreciate that, but I know how these events work. He looked around the magnificent ballroom with polished marble floors reflecting crystal light like still water. People belong where they belong. Claire studied his face. There was no bitterness in his voice. No resentment. Only acceptance earned through years of disappointment. Somehow that hurt more than anger would have. Before she could answer, a familiar voice interrupted from across the lobby. Claire. Richard Hale approached wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that seemed designed more for magazine covers than comfort. His confident smile appeared flawless until he noticed Ethan and Lily. His eyes paused briefly on Ethan's faded jacket before returning to Claire. The board is waiting upstairs. Investors from Chicago are already seated. Claire answered calmly. They can wait another minute. Richard forced a polite laugh. For them? His tone remained pleasant enough that few people would call it rude, yet everyone could hear the quiet layer of disbelief beneath it. Ethan immediately sensed the discomfort building around them. He rested one hand gently on Lily's shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. We should head home. Lily nodded, although disappointment clouded her bright blue eyes. She accepted the envelope and slipped her small hand into her father's calloused one. As they turned toward the revolving doors, Claire watched them begin walking away through the grand lobby. Ethan never once looked back. He simply focused on making sure Lily kept smiling despite everything that had happened. Claire stood perfectly still while the board members continued waiting upstairs, the cameras continued preparing for her speech, and Richard continued talking about quarterly projections she no longer heard. For the first time in many years, the billion-dollar decisions surrounding her seemed strangely insignificant compared to the quiet strength of one father whose greatest success could never be measured on any financial statement. The elevator doors closed behind Claire Whitmore with a whisper so soft it almost disappeared beneath the distant music floating up from the ballroom. The silence inside the executive floor felt different from the warmth she had just left behind. Here, every polished walnut wall, every framed award, every floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Manhattan reminded her of expectations that never seemed to end. As she entered the boardroom, 12 directors immediately stood. A massive digital display filled one wall with stock prices, acquisition timelines, and projected revenue charts stretching years into the future. Richard Hale smiled confidently as though the evening were unfolding exactly according to plan. There you are, he said. Our guests from Chicago are ready to finalize the partnership. Claire took her seat without speaking. A leather folder containing the merger agreement rested neatly before her. At the very top, highlighted in elegant gold lettering, sat the condition every board member had quietly accepted weeks ago. Public engagement between Claire Whitmore and Richard Hale within 72 hours to strengthen investor confidence. One director adjusted his glasses before clearing his throat. Miss Whitmore, this announcement will stabilize the market before Monday morning. Investors respond well to certainty. Another nodded. The merger secures more than 6,000 jobs. The engagement simply reassures shareholders that leadership remains united. Claire looked around the room. Faces she had known for years stared back with carefully practiced professionalism. They spoke about confidence, strategy, and stability, yet not one person asked whether she wanted the future they had already written for her. Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal. Claire, sometimes leadership requires sacrifice. This is bigger than either of us. She met his eyes calmly. Marriage is not a quarterly report. A faint tension settled over the table. Richard forced a patient smile. Nobody is asking for romance. We are asking for responsibility. Claire folded her hands together. There is a difference. The room became still. Outside the enormous windows, evening sunlight reflected across the Hudson River in ribbons of gold, reminding her unexpectedly of the watercolor she had held only minutes earlier. My dad always comes home. Such simple words. Yet somehow they carried more truth than every financial presentation now spread across the polished conference table. One elderly director broke the silence. Miss Whitmore, perception drives markets. Investors trust families. They trust stability. Claire answered quietly. Do they trust honesty? No one replied. Richard finally stood and walked toward the windows. You are letting emotions cloud your judgment because of one little girl and her father. Claire remained perfectly composed. No. I am questioning why a father who quietly protects his daughter possesses more peace than an entire room filled with billion-dollar decisions. Richard turned slowly. He is irrelevant. The words lingered in the room longer than anyone expected. Claire remembered Ethan standing at the registration desk, refusing to argue, refusing to humiliate anyone in return, choosing dignity when bitterness would have been easier. She had spent years surrounded by influential people, yet genuine humility had become almost impossible to find. One board member carefully slid another document toward her. The press conference begins in 20 minutes. We recommend announcing the engagement tonight. Claire looked down at the paper but did not reach for the pen resting beside it. Instead, she quietly closed the folder. The soft sound echoed through the silent room. Every executive watched her. Richard watched her. Even the city lights beginning to glow beyond the glass seemed to pause. Claire stood, smoothing the sleeve of her white coat before speaking with remarkable calm. Before I make the biggest decision of my life, she said, there is one person I need to find. Without another word, she walked toward the boardroom doors, leaving behind 12 stunned directors, an unfinished merger, and a man who had suddenly realized that for the first time since he had met Claire Whitmore, he no longer understood what she was about to do. The revolving doors turned slowly as Ethan Miller and Lily stepped into the cool Manhattan evening. The noise of traffic blended with distant sirens, rumbling buses, and hurried footsteps as people rushed toward trains, restaurants, and apartments scattered across the city that never seemed to sleep. Ethan looked down at Lily and offered the same gentle smile he always wore after difficult days. How about pancakes for dinner? Lily looked up with hopeful eyes. Even on a Thursday? He laughed softly. Especially on a Thursday. She nodded enthusiastically, the disappointment from the ballroom already beginning to fade beneath the simple promise of breakfast for dinner. They had only taken a few more steps before a familiar voice called from behind them. Mr. Miller. Ethan turned. Claire Whitmore stood alone on the wide stone staircase outside the foundation entrance. There were no cameras surrounding her, no board members, no assistants carrying tablets or schedules. Only the evening breeze lifted a loose strand of her blonde hair as she walked toward them with measured steps. Ethan looked slightly surprised. Miss Whitmore. Lily smiled politely. Hello again. Claire returned the smile before taking a slow breath. May I have a few minutes of your time? Ethan glanced at Lily, then back at Claire. If this is about the scholarship, you do not have to explain anything. My daughter understands that life is not always fair. Claire answered quietly. Actually, it is about something entirely different. She hesitated, searching for words she had never imagined saying to a complete stranger. Would you mind walking with me? They crossed the quiet plaza together beneath rows of maple trees glowing beneath warm street lights. The sounds of the gala faded behind them until only the city remained. Lily wandered a few feet ahead, carefully balancing along the edge of a stone planter while humming to herself. Claire finally spoke. I owe you honesty. Ethan listened without interrupting. My company is about to announce a merger worth billions of dollars. The board expects me to become engaged within the next 3 days. Ethan nodded politely, unsure why she was telling him this. Claire continued. The engagement is not about love. It is about business. Investors believe a perfect public image creates confidence. Ethan looked toward the skyline before answering. That sounds like a lonely way to build a future. Claire stopped walking. The sentence settled inside her with unexpected weight because it was true. She looked directly into Ethan's calm blue eyes. I have spent years surrounded by successful people, but today I met someone who reminded me what character actually looks like. Ethan shook his head gently. You barely know me. I know enough, Claire replied. I watched you protect your daughter without humiliating anyone. I watched you leave with dignity after being treated unfairly. Most people would have chosen anger. You chose grace. Ethan smiled faintly. She was watching me. Children remember how we carry disappointment. Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment before lifting them again with quiet determination. Then I am going to ask you something that will probably sound impossible. Ethan waited patiently. Lily turned back toward them, curious but silent. Claire inhaled slowly, feeling the entire weight of her carefully controlled life balancing on a single sentence. Mr. Miller. She paused, her voice steady but sincere. Would you consider becoming my husband? The sounds of Manhattan seemed to disappear all at once. Ethan did not speak. Lily's eyes grew wide with innocent surprise. Claire immediately continued before either of them could misunderstand. Not because I expect love. Not because I can buy your future. I am asking because I need someone the world cannot corrupt, and today I realized that person might already be standing in front of me. For several long seconds, Ethan Miller said nothing. He simply looked at Claire Whitmore with the calm expression of a man who had learned that life often became its most confusing when it appeared most generous. Lily glanced from one adult to the other, sensing that something important had just happened even if she did not fully understand it. Finally Ethan spoke. Miss Whitmore, I think you have mistaken me for someone else. Claire gently shook her head. No. I have spent years surrounded by people pretending to be someone else. That is why I recognized the difference. Ethan released a quiet breath and smiled politely. You are asking a father who fixes electrical systems during the day and works overtime on weekends to become the husband of one of the most successful business leaders in the country. That sounds less like reality and more like one of Lily's bedtime stories. Lily smiled shyly. Mine always have happy endings. Claire looked at the little girl before returning her attention to Ethan. I am not asking you to abandon your life. I am asking for your help. Ethan folded his hands into the pockets of his old blazer. Help usually does not begin with marriage. Claire nodded. You deserve an explanation. They walked toward a quiet bench overlooking the fountain in the plaza where the sound of flowing water softened the city's endless rhythm. Claire remained standing for a moment before speaking. The board believes I should marry Richard Hale because investors trust predictable stories. If I refuse, Richard gains enough influence to control the merger, and one of his first proposals is eliminating our community education foundation. Ethan frowned slightly. The same foundation that funds scholarships for children? Yes, Claire answered. Thousands of students would lose opportunities over the next several years, including children whose families can never afford private education. Ethan became silent again. He watched Lily kneel beside the fountain, smiling as she counted pennies glittering beneath the water. Claire continued carefully. I only need someone willing to stand beside me publicly for a short time. Long enough for the merger vote to end and for the board to lose its leverage. After that, you may return to your life, and no one will ever pressure you again. Ethan looked at her steadily. And what would you offer in return? Claire answered without hesitation. Nothing you cannot refuse. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Claire continued. I will not offer money because I do not believe your integrity has a price. I will not offer luxury because I have already seen you value something far greater. I can only promise honesty and complete respect. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly, considering every word. My daughter has already lost her mother. I will not allow anyone to enter her life unless they understand that she is my first responsibility. Claire's voice softened. I would expect nothing less. Ethan looked toward Lily again. She had quietly begun helping a small boy retrieve a toy sailboat that had drifted against the edge of the fountain. She laughed as the child thanked her, then hurried back carrying the tiny boat as though she had rescued a priceless treasure. Ethan smiled proudly. She reminds me every day what really matters. Claire watched the little girl with thoughtful eyes. Perhaps that is exactly why I came after you tonight. Before Ethan could answer, Lily reached the bench and innocently asked, Daddy, is Miss Whitmore going to have pancakes with us? Ethan and Claire looked at each other before unexpectedly smiling at the same time. It was the first genuine smile Claire had shared with anyone in longer than she could remember, and somehow it appeared more valuable than every headline waiting to be written about her the following morning. The smell of warm butter and maple syrup filled the tiny apartment before anyone spoke again. Lily sat at the small kitchen table swinging her feet beneath the chair while Ethan flipped another pancake onto a chipped blue plate that had survived 3 different apartments and more difficult years than either of them liked to remember. Claire sat quietly across from them, her white coat folded neatly over the back of the chair, looking strangely comfortable in a place where nothing matched except the kindness that lived inside its walls. She watched Ethan pour chocolate chips into one pancake before sliding it onto Lily's plate. Special delivery, he said with a smile. Lily laughed. You remembered. Ethan shrugged playfully. A father remembers important things. Claire wrapped both hands around a simple ceramic coffee mug. She had attended dinners worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet somehow this modest meal felt richer than any of them. The apartment walls displayed framed school drawings instead of expensive artwork. A bookshelf leaned slightly to one side beneath worn novels borrowed from the local library. Beside the window sat an aging upright piano with faded ivory keys. Claire noticed it immediately. Does someone play? Ethan looked toward the instrument before answering. My wife did. Lily is learning a little. Lily nodded proudly. Daddy says we keep it because memories deserve a home. Claire lowered her eyes, quietly absorbing the sentence. Ethan placed another pancake onto his own plate before sitting across from her. You asked for my help tonight, he said gently. Now I need to understand something. Claire nodded. Ask me anything. Ethan looked directly at her. If I agree, what happens when the cameras leave? What happens after the newspapers stop writing about us? Claire answered honestly. Then everything ends exactly as we agree. There will be no hidden contracts. No pressure. No surprises. Ethan remained thoughtful. People with power sometimes forget promises made to people without it. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. Then hold me accountable. Silence settled over the table, broken only by the quiet tapping of rain beginning against the apartment windows. Lily finished another bite before suddenly asking, Miss Whitmore, do you eat pancakes a lot? Claire smiled softly. Not nearly enough. Lily grinned. Daddy says pancakes taste better when somebody is sitting with you. Claire looked at Ethan. He gave a modest smile. Food fills your stomach. Company fills the rest. Something inside Claire shifted again. For years she had measured success through quarterly reports, international flights, and endless meetings. Sitting inside a small apartment where a child believed pancakes could heal lonely hearts suddenly felt more meaningful than another corporate victory. Ethan stood and walked toward the old piano. He gently brushed a little dust from the lid before lifting it. Lily, would you like to show our guest the song you practiced? Lily hesitated for a moment before climbing onto the worn piano bench. Her small fingers carefully found each note, slowly playing a simple melody with determination rather than perfection. Ethan never corrected her mistakes. He simply stood nearby, smiling every time she found the next note. Claire watched father and daughter together, realizing neither of them cared whether the music was flawless. They only cared that they were making it together. When the final note faded into the gentle rhythm of falling rain, Lily looked hopefully toward Claire. How was it? Claire felt unexpected tears gathering behind her eyes, but she smiled before answering. It was beautiful because someone taught you that being perfect matters less than playing with your whole heart. Ethan quietly closed the piano lid. Neither he nor Claire noticed that, across the street below, a black luxury sedan had come to a silent stop beneath the streetlight, and inside the back seat, Richard Hale stared toward the apartment building with growing suspicion, already realizing that Claire Whitmore had chosen to spend her evening somewhere he had never imagined she would go. The rain continued through the night, washing the city streets until the morning sun returned with a quiet brightness that made every building shimmer against a clear blue sky. Claire Whitmore arrived at headquarters earlier than anyone else, yet peace did not follow her through the glass doors. Every hallway buzzed with whispers. Every television inside the executive lobby replayed financial news predicting the announcement that investors expected before the markets opened on Monday. She stepped into her office and found Richard Hale already waiting beside the windows with 2 cups of untouched coffee resting on the table. He turned with an easy smile that felt rehearsed. I thought you might need this. Claire placed her briefcase beside her desk without accepting the drink. You came early. Richard folded his hands. People tend to arrive early before history is made. Claire answered calmly. History is usually written after decisions, not before them. Richard studied her carefully. You were not at home last night. Claire did not react. Is that a question? It is an observation. Silence settled between them. Richard walked slowly across the office before stopping beside a framed photograph of Claire receiving a National Business Leadership Award several years earlier. You have spent your entire career building an image of confidence. I would hate to see one emotional decision damage everything you created. Claire looked toward the skyline outside her office windows. Sometimes an image is exactly what prevents someone from living honestly. Richard's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Does this have something to do with the man from last night? Claire turned to face him. His name is Ethan Miller. Richard nodded once. A maintenance electrician with an aging apartment, a modest income, and a little girl depending on him. Claire frowned slightly. You investigated him. Richard answered without apology. I protect this company. Claire's voice remained steady. No. You protect control. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Claire, people like him admire people like us because they hope our world will rescue theirs. Claire immediately replied, You never met him if that is what you believe. Richard laughed softly. Everyone has a price. Claire remembered Ethan refusing special treatment at the registration desk, refusing money for helping strangers, refusing even to complain after being embarrassed in front of his daughter. She quietly answered, Not everyone. Across the city, Ethan climbed a ladder inside an elementary school gymnasium, replacing worn ceiling lights before the new semester began. He tightened the final fixture, climbed back down, and wiped his hands with an old work towel. His supervisor approached carrying a clipboard. Miller, somebody has been calling the office all morning asking for you. Ethan looked surprised. Who? She would only leave a name. Claire. Ethan nodded politely but said nothing. During his lunch break he sat alone beneath a maple tree outside the school while opening the lunchbox Lily had packed before class. Inside rested a peanut butter sandwich cut into 2 uneven triangles, a small apple, and a folded note written in careful handwriting. Daddy, you always tell me brave people tell the truth even when they are scared. I think Miss Whitmore looked scared yesterday. Maybe she needs somebody honest. Ethan read the note twice before quietly folding it again. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass across the playground where children laughed in the distance. He realized Lily had seen something that every executive in a billion-dollar company had somehow missed. Claire Whitmore was not searching for a husband because she was powerful. She was searching for someone she could finally trust. At that very moment, several blocks away, Claire stood before the board of directors and calmly announced that before the week was over, she would personally introduce the man who would change the future of Whitmore Global forever. Friday afternoon arrived beneath a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain, and the headquarters of Whitmore Global buzzed with more reporters than employees. Satellite trucks lined the street while camera crews adjusted lights outside the main entrance. Inside the executive auditorium, investors, directors, and financial journalists filled every seat, eager to witness the announcement that had dominated business headlines for days. Richard Hale stood confidently near the front row, convinced the final outcome could still be controlled. Claire Whitmore waited quietly behind the stage curtain, holding a simple folder that contained no prepared speech. Her assistant approached with nervous eyes. The press is asking whether the engagement announcement is confirmed. Claire answered calmly. Tell them they will hear everything directly from me. Across town, Ethan Miller stood outside his apartment building after finishing work, staring at the invitation Claire had personally delivered that morning. It contained only one sentence. Please come exactly as you are. He looked down at his work boots, his neatly pressed navy blazer, and then toward Lily, who stood holding his hand. Do you think I belong there? He asked softly. Lily smiled the way only children can when answers seem wonderfully simple. Daddy, you belong anywhere people need kindness. Ethan laughed quietly before kneeling beside her. And if everyone laughs again? Lily gently touched his cheek. Then smile anyway. You always tell me that people cannot take away something you never stop giving. Those words settled deep inside him. An hour later, father and daughter entered Whitmore Global through the front doors. Conversations immediately slowed. Expensive suits turned toward Ethan's familiar blazer. Camera lenses shifted in his direction. A few whispers floated through the marble lobby. That is him. The electrician. Is he really the one? Ethan ignored every curious glance. He focused only on Lily walking proudly beside him. Claire met them near the private elevator. For the first time since they had met, she looked visibly relieved. Thank you for coming. Ethan answered honestly. I still do not know why I am here. Claire looked into his eyes. You will. As the elevator climbed toward the executive auditorium, neither of them spoke. Only the gentle hum of the cables filled the silence. When the doors opened, applause erupted from the audience, assuming Claire had arrived alone to announce her engagement to Richard. Instead, every sound gradually faded as she stepped onto the stage beside Ethan and Lily. Hundreds of faces stared in complete confusion. Richard slowly rose from his seat, forcing a composed expression despite the surprise spreading across the room. Claire approached the podium. For the past week, she began, many people have assumed they already knew what decision I would make. She paused, allowing the silence to settle naturally. They believed leadership was about appearances. They believed trust could be manufactured. They believed character could be replaced by strategy. She stepped away from the microphone and turned toward Ethan instead of the audience. 3 days ago, I watched a father quietly protect his daughter after both had been humiliated. He did not demand respect. He demonstrated it. The room became perfectly still. Richard finally interrupted with a controlled smile. Claire, this is becoming emotional. Investors expect clarity. Claire calmly faced him. Then let me be perfectly clear. She reached into her folder and removed the merger agreement. Without anger or drama, she folded the document once, then placed it gently on the podium. Any future built on manipulation is already unstable. A wave of whispers spread through the auditorium. Richard's confident smile disappeared. Claire looked back at Ethan with quiet sincerity. You once told me children remember how adults carry disappointment. Today I hope this company remembers how leaders carry responsibility. For the first time in years, the wealthiest people in the room found themselves waiting, not for the next financial projection, but for the answer of one humble father whose greatest strength had never been money, power, or influence, but the quiet dignity that no one had ever been able to buy. No one moved. No one reached for a microphone. Even the cameras seemed to forget to record as an extraordinary silence settled over the auditorium. Ethan Miller looked across the sea of executives, reporters, and investors before turning back toward Claire Whitmore. He spoke quietly, yet every word carried through the room without effort. Miss Whitmore, when you first asked me to help you, I thought you were looking for someone to stand beside your reputation. Today I realize you were looking for someone to stand beside your heart. Claire's eyes shimmered, but she remained composed. Ethan continued, I cannot promise to understand board meetings or stock prices. I cannot promise to fit perfectly into a world I have never lived in. But I can promise that I will never pretend to be someone I am not. He glanced toward Lily, who smiled with complete confidence. My daughter has spent years teaching me that love grows strongest when it is built on truth. I cannot teach her one thing at home and live another in public. Claire slowly stepped closer. That is exactly why I chose you. Richard Hale stood frozen beside the front row, watching the room slip beyond his control without anyone raising their voice. Several directors lowered their eyes, realizing that every calculation they had made had overlooked the one quality no financial model could measure. Character. Claire turned toward the audience one final time. For years I believed success meant never appearing vulnerable. Then I met a father who showed me that real strength is quiet. It does not need applause. It only needs integrity. She reached into her handbag and carefully removed the watercolor Lily had painted. Holding it where everyone could see, she smiled. This little girl reminded me what leadership looks like. Someone who always comes home. Someone who always shows up. Someone who never lets go of the people entrusted to their care. She faced Ethan once more. 3 days ago I asked you a question because I needed a solution. Today I am asking because I have found something infinitely more valuable. Her voice softened, though it never trembled. Ethan Miller, would you truly consider building a life with Lily and me, not for a merger, not for a headline, but because together we might become the family neither of us expected to find? Ethan looked into her eyes for a long moment before answering with the same calm that had carried him through every hardship life had placed before him. Yes. Not because of your company. Not because of your success. Because somewhere between a little girl's painting and a plate of pancakes, I met a woman who never stopped searching for what money could never buy. A quiet gasp spread through the audience before fading into something even more powerful. Respect. Lily slipped her small hands into both of theirs and looked up with a radiant smile. Does this mean we can all have pancakes together next Thursday? Claire laughed through happy tears. I would like that very much. Ethan gently squeezed both of their hands. Then it is a promise. The auditorium remained silent for another heartbeat before every person slowly rose to their feet. The applause that followed was warm but somehow secondary to the stillness that had come before it, because everyone present understood they had witnessed something far greater than a corporate announcement. They had watched dignity defeat pride without humiliation, kindness overcome power without force, and two lonely lives discover that second chances often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary people who simply choose to do the right thing. And long after the headlines disappeared and the markets moved on to the next story, those who had stood inside that room remembered one unforgettable truth. The greatest fortunes are never measured by what we own, but by the people who gladly choose to walk beside us all the way home.